Diversity, equity, and inclusion is certainly a hot topic these days, but as we found out filming this episode, there's no real agreement on its definition. We spoke with attorneys, executives, faculty, and administrators, and beyond there being no agreement on its definition, nobody really knows how to measure its success in either the short term or in the long term. All I can tell you is this. Everybody's talking about this, and everyone wants to do the right thing, but how you get from here to there, and where here starts and where there ends, is exactly what you're about to watch. We're on location virtually with Nargis Kakalia of Mintz 11 out of New York, and welcome to the Language of Business.
Thanks so much. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you here. How is DEI practiced differently at a law firm?
Law firms are sort of like a loose federation of states tied together only for one core purpose, which is the practice of law. And so you have to overlay a diversity, equity, and inclusion framework over that core purpose and then sort of drive it out into the different sections of business units to make it work. I imagine it's different in corporations, but the defining principles obviously are the same, which is to make sure that every employee, every vendor, everyone has an equal opportunity to succeed.
And when you talk about different divisions, are you talking civil versus criminal or different Mintz 11 offices across the country?
I am talking about the former, but it's a lot more than just civil versus criminal, right? So we might have immigration or corporate or litigation or employment work, so across all of those. But then also we have so many administrative departments in a law firm. So the recruiting team needs to be diverse, and our business management team needs to be diverse. So it's really across the board.
And where is the focal point? Is it for your colleagues, your clients, or both?
It's definitely both. Diversity, equity, and inclusion isn't just something we do on like a Tuesday, right? It's sort of a way of doing business. And so we try to do business that way because it's the right thing to do, but also because our clients demand it of us. So it is employee focused, but it's very much also client focused. It's sort of a Venn diagram with diversity in the middle.
In the future, do you see a new division being created at Mintz to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, but from a legal lens?
Yes. In fact, we've started thinking about that. There are certainly issues that come up, and we already work on them mostly out of our employment section, but there are things like internal systems audits, right? Is our promotion pipeline for a corporation, is the promotion pipeline truly neutral? Is it gender neutral? Is it race neutral? Those are services that we already provide to our clients, but there are also things that we're thinking about and fine-tuning and making better every day internally.
How, though, do you expect to measure your success over time?
Measuring diversity, which is really just checking to see if we have sufficient numbers of people from certain demographics, that's kind of easy. How many Asian American employees do you have? How many Latinx employees do you have? How many Black employees do you have? How many white employees do you have? How many women? How many men? How many LGBTQ? That's sort of simple. What's harder to measure is equity and inclusion. So are you promoting men and women at the same rates? I think across corporate America, almost inevitably, the answer is going to be no. Certainly in the law firm setting, it's no. If a certain person of color community is 10% of the population, are 10% of your leaders within the firm of that population? The answer almost inevitably is no. So trying to figure out why those disparities exist and measuring success in fixing and addressing those issues, that's difficult, but we're working on it. And then inclusion is sort of that level of belonging, making sure that people feel comfortable coming into work every day and raising their hand and contributing. That's also difficult to measure.
Nargis, if you looked into a crystal ball, do you think we're going to still be having the same discussions 5 years from now?
I hope not, but I suspect we will be. Diversity ultimately is to have a really rich mix of people. we're focusing on people of color. We may be focusing on women right now, but we haven't even scratched the surface of making sure that we have people with disabilities represented, neurodiversity represented, people from other countries who speak multiple languages represented. So yes, this is a conversation we're going to be having a lot of in the foreseeable future.
Let me give you a hypothetical. You have an employee who's really high performing and deserves to be promoted, but in doing so, you're going to throw off the statistics one way or another. What do you do?
Yeah, I don't think that life is quite so linear, right? So it's not like we're saying there has to be that 20% of all promotions have to be a certain demographic or bust. That's not how it works. I think what we're trying to make sure is that when we get around to promotions, we have adequately helped someone succeed so that they can get beyond the threshold regardless of what their race is or what their gender is. So the question doesn't really arise when we're doing promotions, whether we should promote A or B because A might be white and B might be black. The question is, what have we done in the arc of A and B's careers before that moment to prepare them so that they're both ready for that promotion, right? Equally ready. And that's really where the challenge lies.
Nargis, if there's a disparity between two different Mint offices, are you going to physically move employees between them in order to balance things out?
No, we're not looking to, say, transfer people of color from LA to DC or women from Boston to San Diego. That's not what we're trying to do. What we're really trying to do is make sure that organically every single office and the firm as a whole represents the community that it belongs in. But ultimately, this is the core issue is making sure that our employees are engaged and fulfilled. And moving them around isn't going to achieve that, right? We just want to make sure that they have the support from their peers and from the institution that they need.
Nargis, thank you.
You're welcome.
Nargis Kakalia with Mintz Levin out of New York.
Big choices after college, right? Grad school, maybe? Soar from your undergraduate major to a great career in business. Biomedical engineer to healthcare analyst. Health science to clinical systems analyst. Mechanical engineer to solutions engineer. Before you know it, you can have a master's degree in management studies. 9 months and you're in business.
How does being an attorney inform your perspective on diversity, equity, and inclusion? We're on location virtually with Dion Lomax, a lecturer in markets, public policy, and law at Boston University Questrom School of Business, and welcome to the Language of Business.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
We're happy to have you here. What does a lecturer teach about markets and public policy?
Well, what I teach is essentially business law, right? I teach everything from torts to contracts to securities regulation, everything that a budding executive needs to know in order to not step into those pit holes once they start working.
And how does that inform your perspective on diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, I think I can maybe rephrase it this way. I think that knowing the legalities around certain conduct helps you understand where the guardrails are, because as we know, sometimes law is not just black and white, it's gray. And so if I know what's permissible and impermissible, as different DE&I efforts or initiatives are being rolled out or implemented, I can do two things. One, I can be more impactful and effective in terms of knowing what might work and what might not work. But also, and probably more importantly, in particular for the legal departments at various companies, it helps you know where the landmines are so that as you create and think you're resolving one issue, you're not creating a legal issue somewhere else.
And that's exactly what I want to talk about. Is that a landmine or a difference in perspective?
Sometimes it could be a landmine. You might be resolving an issue for one group, but the way that it's implemented and the way that it gets rolled out, for some reason, maybe it creates an actual legal claim for retaliation or a legal claim for hostile work environment for a different group. So sometimes it could actually be a landmine.
Given that you work in both academia and the private sector, are you seeing different DEI trends in both worlds?
Outside of academia, I'm seeing companies take proactive steps to increase the level of representation of underrepresented groups at various levels. For example, in the last probably literally month alone, I've seen at least a half dozen African American women installed as on various boards of directors, or installed as the chief legal officer of major Fortune 500 companies. So that's what I'm seeing outside of academia. What I'm seeing inside academia, and I can, obviously speak to my experience at Questrom, is that I see academia also taking a proactive role. For example, Questrom developed within the last year, they developed a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee that includes students, faculty, as well as staff, and those who are part of the administration. Now, that committee includes various subcommittees, and those subcommittees are studying everything from lack of diverse protagonists in case studies. They're looking at structuring certain initiatives to make sure that when students work in project or in teams, that there aren't certain microaggressions happening within those teams that are marginalizing those who are culturally or ethnically different. And they also are, I think this has very personal to me, is that they have supported the development of a new course. I developed, along with Professor Fatima Bazandero, a new course titled Business Law and Discrimination. It's a pilot course that we just started offering this semester, and it's being offered at the MBA as well as the undergraduate level.
So if you had to put it all together, what short-term recommendations would you have for companies to effectively manage this?
Well, I guess three things. One, I think you need to make sure that you create a safe or comfortable environment for employees to have conversations about race.
Wait a second. Let me stop you right there, please. From whose perspective are we talking? The companies or the employees? Because I would argue that it's not necessarily going to always be evenly split.
No, that's true. Safe from the employee's perspective. Because having conversations around race, they're difficult. They're difficult for those who are underrepresented, right? Because sometimes those who are underrepresented feel like if they speak up, they might be labeled as too sensitive. But those who are in the majority also don't want to have those conversations because they feel like if I say the wrong thing, even in this context, I'm going to be labeled a racist, right? So there's ways around that, though. You can have, and this would be my second, I guess, tip is, not just trainings, because trainings can backfire because people may feel like if they're forced to do it, that, it's just, sometimes it's not the best mechanism. Sometimes just having a town hall where you may discuss a current event that surrounds the issue of race. That way it's a little bit more tangentially removed from the employees. Sometimes you can have a private hotline where, how should I put it? They don't know when they're acting within their bias and doing harm in a particular situation. And so maybe there's a private hotline where people can just report, hey, this happened, it made me uncomfortable, what have you. And it's a way for the company to keep their fingers on the pulse of what really is going on in the underbelly of the organization so that they know when they may need to act.
And to date, how many companies are doing this? And are they doing it because they want to or because they have to?
I'll put it this way. What you see in business happening right now is companies are moving away from just having to make more money for the shareholder as being their goal, right? Shareholder maximizing value for the shareholder. And they're looking more at who are our corporate stakeholders, because our stakeholders can be just as important as our shareholders, right? Our customers, our suppliers. And why is that? Because social media is alive and well. And if God forbid something bad happens, your stakeholders might be jumping up and down about we need to see something change here, or it could impact the goodwill of the company. So, I like to think that they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart, but quite frankly, they're probably also doing it because they want to keep those stakeholders happy.
Dion, thank you. Dion Lomax, a lecturer in markets, public policy, and law, and managing director at AMI Affiliated Monitors Incorporated.
Are you a problem solver? Do you see the big picture and the small details? Want to turn big data into big decisions? Take AI to the boardroom. Translate rocket science into the science of business? Build your career at digital speed with a Master of Science in Business Analytics. Be ready for careers like analytics consultant, data science, analytics strategist, data translator, BI analyst, technical business analyst. 10 months and you're in business analytics.
Google has taken the lead in so much in tech, but does that advantage extend to diversity, equity, and inclusion? We're on location with Thomas Harwell, a DEI liaison for Google, and welcome to the Language of Business.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be back with you and talking to you about this topic, which I find so intriguing and is my current life's work.
DEI is so much of everyone's lexicon these days. What does it mean for you, Thomas, as an executive?
For me, the first thing that I remind people when we talk about DEI is that it's actually 3 words: diversity, equity, and inclusion. And each of those words has different meanings and how we apply them to business. So for me, when I'm talking about diversity, I'm likely talking about the collective shared experiences that people are bringing to our workforce or the representation in our workforce. When I talk about equity, I'm usually talking about processes and the outcomes that our processes produce, whether it's hiring or how we develop a product or something like that sits in some of my teammates' world. We talk about inclusion. We're talking about how people feel at work. What is the work environment they're experiencing, their relationship to their managers, their career progression. And so I think DEI has become a buzz acronym, and I always try to caution people from using it interchangeably because it has a lot of complexity in the work. There are 3 distinct ideas and concepts that are really important in business today. And so that's what it means for me in the work that I do.
I know you left academia and now work at Google, but how do you write a job description for a DEI lead?
I think we're all still figuring that out. So I think depending on the organization, the needs of what you need in a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer might look different. Also, I think the great work that you do for the communities that are on the margins of your organization often gets adopted to support your whole organization to make it better. And so in that way, I find this work really fun because it's ever changing. Once we figure out how to enable or unlock part of our process in one area of the business, we can do that for all groups. And then we sort of continue to refine how that impacts those folks on the margins.
So let's talk about that. We're talking with attorneys, educators, and administrators, but for someone working in tech, what does DEI specifically mean to you?
It's about how do you develop products that are truly inclusive. I think there's an old example for Google out there about just having sample testers of a phone that use their right thumb and getting to the product line and realizing that people who are left-handed can't actually use the product because we didn't have anyone in that test group. So there's product inclusion that we talk about. There's people like me who work in the hiring space and the representation space. And it's how do we make sure that our hiring processes are fair, that they're producing the outcomes that we believe to be equitable across the experiences, that we're not limiting the pipeline of people who have the opportunity to be considered for roles at Google and or other tech companies, and how they're evaluated from a hiring manager perspective, that we mitigate as much bias as possible in that work. And then you have people who are focused on the culture of Google. What does it mean for me to be a Black Googler? What should I expect to experience? What do I experience? What are my avenues when I experience things that are really great or really hard? How do we coach leaders and managers when we're seeing experiences around the world, but also in the US that are highly visible with regards to race and racism and racial violence? How do we coach people through that? What are the exceptions we should make through that? How do we make sure that people are well and able to contribute at work? So this impacts every part of the employee life cycle. It impacts every part of our product life cycle, and that's why I find it really exciting.
Thomas, I noticed that you didn't use the term racism. How does that relate directly or collaterally?
There are several types of racism, right? And so I will just use 2 examples, individual racism and then institutional racism. When I talk about individual racism, I'm talking about the interaction that might happen between you and me, Greg, right? Like if you maybe it's something as little as a microaggression that impacts my ability to feel like I fit into the culture of the team that I'm on, feel like I'm valued. How do we make sure that people in the majority group understand how their actions impact other people, right? Maybe there's good intent, but the impact is not exactly what we want. There's also institutional racism, practices and policies that perpetuate outcomes that are unfair for communities of color, in the example of racism amongst other xenophobic spaces we could go to or other isms we could go to. So you could take hiring, for instance, and I won't talk specifically about Google, but I'll talk about hiring in the broader ecosystem. And you could say, hey, we're interviewing this many people, and this is the demographic breakdown of these people, and this is how many Black and brown people who we hired. And if the number of Black and brown people isn't consistent across your process, then you might have some institutionalized racism in your hiring process. And so again, that might be the catalyst for what you choose to address or how you choose to leverage the DEI practitioners and professionals in your team.
Thomas, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thomas Harwell, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Lead at Google.
Big choices after college, right? Grad school, maybe? Soar from your undergraduate major to a great career in business. Biomedical engineer to healthcare analyst. Health science to clinical systems analyst. Mechanical engineer to solutions engineer. Before you know it, you can have a master's degree in management studies. 9 months and you're in business.
We're on location virtually with Cecilia Uden, Interim Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Boston University Questrom School of Business, and welcome to the Language of Business.
Mabuhay, Greg. Thank you so much for having me.
Nice to have you here. DEI is such a positive buzzword these days, but Cecilia, what does it specifically mean to you?
I first think about diversity, equity, and inclusion as being verbs and not nouns. It's important to recognize that there's an emphasis on intentional actions to address long-standing systems in order to become a diverse, equitable, and inclusive society. There's a common framework in describing the nuances of DEI, and that's in thinking about going to a party, something that we are all looking forward to doing soon. And so when you think about a party, diversity is who's invited. So who's there? Inclusion is who's being asked to dance at the party, who's involved. And equity is being asked what song you want played so that you feel like dancing. So really recognizing that diversity is who's in the room, inclusion is are they participating, and equity is do they have what they need to be successful in participating.
But if it's neither a verb nor a noun, what is it? Is it an initiative? Is it a following? How can you go one step further?
It's all of that. And something that's common in DEI and social justice work is this concept of yes and, not thinking about things as either or, but expanding the pie, right? A mindset of abundance. And so to me, diversity, equity, inclusion certainly are initiatives and they are statements and they are goals, but it's the actions behind them that will truly make the difference.
And what trends are you seeing in that area these days?
For me, to think about trends in DEI, it can be a bit misleading because at its core, diversity, equity, and inclusion is rooted in lived experiences. And so we're really, in terms of business, looking to humanize ourselves in this space. And so something that might be perceived as a trend, right, to some folks has been a long lived existence for other communities. But I think as we think about a general direction in DEI and business is the shift of this is no longer a nice to have, but a need to have in terms of how business thinks about their strategies, their success metrics, their goals.
So if it's a must-have, how do you measure success in that area?
As we know, in all aspects, it's important to have SMART goals to know what we're aiming for. And so often when organizations, think about, how can we become more diverse? It's important that we understand what diverse means for that particular organization. So the answer of how do you measure success depends on the organization itself. Again, that example of we want to become a more diverse organization. what does diverse mean to you? Is it racially diverse, sexual orientation, class, socioeconomic diversity? In being able to identify how you look to diversify your organization, you can set these SMART goals that you can then work towards. And it's that self-work and naming specific goals that is really how we can measure success.
So I loved your example of putting together a guest list and throwing a party, but how does Questrom's initiatives differ from that of Boston University as a whole?
It's been a fun journey. Questrom has officially been doing DEI work since we hired our first director for student diversity and inclusion in fall 2016. And at that time, we were really the only school or college on the Charles River campus that was doing formal DEI work. Fast forward, nearly 5 years later, and BU has an overarching Office of Diversity and Inclusion. All 17 schools and colleges have someone formally leading DEI at their schools. So there's a lot of collaboration and best practices happening. But Questrom is still able to differentiate themselves in the BU ecosystem in that we have a Center for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And this is the only program office that is dedicated fully to the student experience as it relates to DEI. And so what that means for students at Questrom, both graduates and undergraduates, is that throughout their time at BU and at Questrom, they have intentional touch points as it relates to diversity education, identity conscious initiatives, and community building opportunities. So it's really woven into the fabric of their experience, less so, having to seek it out.
So if the students are going outside of their families or you're going outside of the university, what are you hearing positive or negative about racism in business?
As folks are beginning to do the self-work to realize whether their organizations or institutions have racist practices, right? The first step is recognizing it. The next thing is learning what to do next. As we've seen, it's not enough to just have a statement denouncing racism. It's really in the actions that are going to make the difference for an organization. And for me, this is really what comes to the core of Dr. Ibram Kendi's, how to be anti-racist work. You can think about racism or really any oppressive structure as a moving walkway. So when you're on a moving walkway, you don't have to do anything and you're still moving towards something. And so that is how we can see racism in this country for the past 400 plus years has slowly been moving us towards a society. If we want to change direction on that moving walkway, we have to actively work against it. And so it's that component of the anti-racist approach and how to, break down these structures that really is the next part of how to address racism in business.
Cecilia, thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Cecilia Uden, Interim Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Boston University Questrom School of Business.
Support for the Language of Business is from Boston University Questrom School of Business. We're also available as a podcast on Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you get podcasts. Thanks for watching.